We've looked at a few quick measures, and I want to show you another one called star ratings, which I quite like. I'm going to take you back to the page called Net and Freight Movement. And what I want to do is I want to create a table under this particular, under this matrix, and I want to create another matrix. So I'm going to click on a blank part of the canvas. On my visualization pane, choose matrix, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to add months as a row. I'd like to add year as columns, and so you can see my months down the side and my years across the top. And where the two intersect, I'd actually like to see the freight, and so I'm going to add freight as my values. All right, so there's my matrix. But what I want to do is I now want to add a quick measure. So I'm going to right click fact orders and go for a new quick measure. And the calculation I'd like to show you is star rating. We've looked at a few of these now, and star rating is under text. Now the base value is actually going to be the freight. So I add freight to my base value, which is the sum of freight. The maximum number of stars I want to see is 3, and the minimum number of stars I want to see is 0. And the value for the highest star rating will go 10,000. And so I'm just going to go add, and it creates a quick measure in my query, simply showing here as freight star rating. And here, of course, because I have it clicked, I can actually see the DAX formula that is used to work out the star rating. So those quick measures save you a lot of typing. Now what I want to do is add this to my matrix. So I'm going to add the star rating to my values just underneath sum of freight. And there I can see my stars now showing in my matrix. And let me just click on, say, order date to make that DAX formula go away. And I'll just stretch this so we can see what's going on here. And then click again to unfilter. All right, so we have a max of 3 stars, and it'll be anywhere between no stars here to 3 stars because it's getting close to 10,000. So that's a really handy thing as well, as being able to show stars as a quick measure. Now the other thing that's quite handy is being able to group or bin data, especially if you have a lot of data. So I'm going to close this option here, for example. And what we've got is we've got a variety of product categories. And say I want to group those categories into 2 main groups. So in the fields pane, where I've got the categories query right at the top here, if I expand that, I've got category name here. If you want to create some groups, then just right click a field and go not new measure or new column, but go new group. And here I can give the group a name if I want to, but what I'm going to do is just choose beverages, hold the control key, choose condiments, confections, and grains and cereals. And I'm just going to group those, and because I didn't type a name, it gave it the name beverages, condiments, confections, and grains and cereals. Happy with that. I'm going to now click dairy products, shift click seafood to select that entire group, and just group that. And again, it creates a name for it because I didn't. If I then choose OK, I've actually created 2 main groups, and that's what I see now in my query. I see, and it's got its own little symbol, different again. So we're starting to acknowledge these different symbols for calculated columns, for measures, and now we've got a unique symbol for grouping. Now, what if I actually want to change that group at all? You could double click it to rename it. But if I click the little button on the end, I can go edit groups, and that's where I can click on things and say, actually, I want to ungroup it, or I want to rename it, or anything as far as managing those groups, you can go into edit groups. But what if I want to use it actually in a column chart? So I'm going to go to a page called In Stock. And I'd like to create a chart out the side here, and that chart is just a column chart. So I'm going to click on a blank part of my canvas, ask for a column chart. There it is there, and I can stretch it out a little bit. And then I'm going to add my classification or my category name. Let's say I do rename this. I'm going to just double click it and call it classification. Classification. And I'm going to add the classification to my x-axis. So there will eventually be my classifications. And I'm going to grab my units in stock. Units in stock can be found in my products table. Units in stock goes to the y-axis. So straight away, there are my two classifications, and that is the number of units I have in stock broken into two groups. You can easily group data just by right-clicking the field in the data pane, and that can be really handy as far as drilling and as far as summarizing information if there's no obvious group actually in the data itself. So I'm going to save my Power BI, and I'm going to see you on the next video. An important feature in Power BI, and I believe one of its biggest selling points, is its ability to filter information. And when it comes to filtering information, it can be done in a variety of ways. For example, when we're in Power BI for desktop, we do have a filters pane. And when we have a filters pane, we can actually click on a particular page and we can add filters to here to filter all the visuals on that page. Or we could add a field to here which filters all visuals on all pages. And if I was to click this particular visual, I could actually add a particular filter that would filter just this visual. And in fact, it currently has 1, 2, 3, 4 fields, and I could filter any of those 4 or add a 5th field if necessary. So filtering is a very strong point in Power BI. And one of the visuals that really facilitates filtering are slices. And I want to have a look at slices and particularly editing interactions between visuals. I'm going to start by first of all going to the page called Net and Freight. And I'm going to move this table that we created earlier down the page. What I want to do is add a slicer in this area here, and slicers come in a variety of forms. I'm going to first of all go to my Visualisations pane, and here's my slicer button here, which I'll just click, and it occupies the space I just created. Now I want to be able to slice and dice this information by year, so I'll go to my date table, and there's a particular field year that I could add to this field or simply drop onto the slicer. Now by default, this slicer has adopted a sort of a range look about it. Now, if I was to drag this circle on the right to the left, I've narrowed down to the years 2019 and 2020. And if I drag it back to the right, I'm now seeing that both visuals react and show me 2019 to 2021. If I drag this circle to the right, I've narrowed both visuals down to 2020 and 2021 and vice versa. So this particular slicer, and I can resize it, is having quite an impact on the visuals on this page. But I mentioned it comes in a variety of forms. I've clicked on this particular slicer and I'm going to go to my Visualisations pane and format this visual. And what we've got here, if I click this chevron, are slicer settings. And the type of slicer you've got at the moment, the style I should say, is a between style. But I could actually hit this drop down and change it to one of 6 different options. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. If I click on vertical list, then this is how my slicer appears. And I'm able to choose this year or click it again to unchoose it. Click this year or click it again to unchoose it. Or I could click 1 year, hold the control key and choose a second year, 2019 and 2021. Or I could just simply click on a particular year and I've gone back to seeing all the years. So that's a vertical list, and that may be what you're looking for. But what does a tile look like? Well, a tile looks like a collection of buttons, and you just click on the tile for the year that you're after. And of course you can stretch this if you want your tiles to look a certain way, and I can drag it back. You can also customize the tiles, and whether it's a 2 by 2, simply by going to format your visual. And when you go to slicer settings, you're able to choose various options in here such as selection, whether you can select just a single option or whether you can select multiple options holding the control key, and whether it shows the select all option. So if I turn this on, I have the option now to select all, and that's had an impact on my layout. So now I've got tiles where I can select a particular year or all years. But another type of style is drop down. And if I choose drop down, this is popular because it takes very little space. With the drop down, I'm able to now hit the drop down and choose which option I'd like. So drop down is another popular way of presenting your slicer. Between is what we started with, where we had this particular circular arrangement and we dragged to the left and right. But there are other options very similar to that are less than. And if you choose less than, then you can only go less than 2021. And if I was to change it to greater than or equal to, you can only go greater than or equal to 2019. So you can only go up, not down. And so various ways that you can filter all the visuals on that page using a slicer. Now I'm actually going to go for the option called list. In fact, I'm going to go vertical list. And I'll just stretch it like that. And I will go for the option select all, and I will leave it that they can choose multiple options. So that's my slicer there. Now the next thing I want to do is not only, now I want to look at the fact that you can choose which visuals are affected by that particular slicer. At the moment, all visuals are affected by the slicer. For example, I'm just resizing things so they fit better. And so, for example, if I was to choose 2019, you'll see both of these visuals are affected if I took away 2019. Let me just select all, 2020. Now they're just showing me simply 2020 in the table and 2020 in the chart. All right. What if I didn't want the table to be affected, only the chart to be affected by my choices in the slicer? You can do that if you were to work with edit interactions. When you go to the Format tab in your ribbon, there's this button on the left-hand side called Edit Interactions. And when you click it, what happens is you see two little buttons appear in the top of the table, at the top of the slicer, and let me just collapse that, and at the top of the chart. Now, if you choose the circle with a line through it, it means that that particular visual will not be affected by the slicer. If you choose this particular visual, it will be affected and filtered by the slicer. So let's say I don't want the table to be affected. So I'm going to choose this option for the table. And immediately it's showing me all the years. Whereas the slicer is on 2020 and the chart's only showing me 2020. Now the table is showing me 2019 and 2021. If I turn off the Edit Interactions button, those little symbols disappear. They still work. And so if I was to choose 2019, the chart would have affected, 2020 the chart's affected, and 2021 the chart's affected, but the table is not. So you may have a variety of visuals sitting on a page, and you may decide that certain visuals are to be static. And so that's where you'd go into your Edit Interactions button on your Format tab, and you would click the circle, which is now filled in, to say that that is not to be filtered. I actually do want my table to go back to being filtered, so I'm going to click back on this button here, which is, I may have to resize things to be able to click it. And so now this table is affected by the slicer. I can turn off my edit interaction symbols, and now if I was to select all, the table and the chart are affected by my choices that I make in my slicer. So really, really important to control your interactions on a page. Now the other thing is you may want to see this slicer appear across more than one page. And you don't have to add it to every single page. You can just say you want that slicer to appear on certain pages. And how we do this is if we actually go to the View tab and we choose the Sync Slices button. That brings up another pane here. Now this Sync Slices pane, let me just collapse some of these, lists all the pages in your report. And here is net and freight page is currently, that's the I, is visually showing this slicer. But what if I wanted to show the slicer also on net and freight cumulative, net and freight year to date, and net and freight movements? Let's take these ones off for now. What that means is that this slicer now appears on 4 pages. Let's go have a look. It's already on the net and freight, and if I go to net and freight cumulative and I move this table down and make it sit nicely with the slicer, you can see the slicer is in the same position that it is in the net and freight page. It'll also be on the net and freight year to date. Let me move this table down, make it sit nicely with the slicer. And so that is now appearing on that page and also on net and freight movement. And I will simply move this over. And this particular table I might just adjust a little bit. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go to my Visualisations pane. I'm going to double click some of freight and just simply call it freight. So these columns aren't so wide when I press enter. And I'm also going to double click freight star rating and just call it rating. And that's narrowed those column headings, which means that I could actually pop that alongside of there. And I might just close that for a moment. Okay, so by going into the Sync Slices button, you have in fact brought up the Sync Slices pane. And if I was to click on the slicer, I can see that that slicer is to appear on 4 of all of our pages. You may be wanting it to appear on all pages. And so this particular column with the little I is what pages you want to see or show that slicer on. Now the other thing you can do in the Sync Slices pane is if a choice is made in one of those pages, perhaps the year 2020 is chosen, that it synchronizes the slices with all the other pages that they all show 2020. So that's what this column's about. I'm going to tick the sync, that's that symbol there, and I'm going to synchronize these 4 pages. So the idea now is if I'm on any page and I say, look, I don't want to see all of them, I just want to see 2020, then that is showing me just 2020, that is showing me just 2020, that is showing me just 2020, and that is showing me just 2020. They are all synchronized now. If I ask to see all years, that is now synchronized across this page, and this page. So that's a massive time saver. Think about creating a slicer that's got a useful layout, and then think about perhaps showing it automatically on other pages and or synchronizing it with other pages. Now we can also just simply hide the Sync Slices pane, so that's gone. And that's really filtering using slices. See you in the next video. Now practice what you've learnt, absorb what we've covered, and I'll see you in the next video.